Thank you all for coming. As many of you know, North Carolina is a hotbed for political discussion, political passion, and political action. Those actions and passions and discussions have been demonstrated through the Moral Monday movement that has gone in waves across North Carolina. There are a number of issues leading the discussion, ranging from safe drinking water, to oppression of the poor, to equal pay for equal work, and to voter suppression. Today, we welcome you to the table for a panel discussion that goes beyond the inflammatory rhetoric and gets to the heart of the matter, addressing policy that affects the hardworking women and families of North Carolina. We are pleased to have with us 3 panelists who will address the topics of public education, jobs and economic issues, and healthcare policy and policy reform. First for discussion, we have public school education. Now, many of us are in this room educators or former educators, and this is a very passionate topic. So I'm grateful that we're able to discuss that today. One of the facts that we know is that the funds that are available per pupil in 2014 are less than they were, lower than they were in 1984. It's 2014, and the investment that we have available for our children in public schools is lower than 1984. House and Senate leaders have had a choice to adequately fund public school classrooms or to give to wealthy corporations with tax breaks. And guess who they've chosen? It has not been our students. So here today, our public school education panelist is Representative Tricia Cotham. Tricia is serving her 4th term representing North Carolina House District 100. She now serves as Vice Chair of the House Education Committee. Previously, she was a middle school and high school teacher, which is also exciting, and I believe that deserves a round of applause as well. She also served as the assistant principal at 2 of the state's largest high schools, making her the state's youngest ever administrator. I present to you Representative Cotham.
I do want to talk about education, and I know you're going to ask questions, and education is a loaded topic, because to some people it means just university, to some it's early childhood. So, but who is the most invested in education? Women. The teachers? Women. That's a predominance of North Carolina. We hear about tenure a lot. North Carolina technically does not have tenure. We have career status. Career status was created, why? Because of pregnant women. Because from an educational social perspective, pregnant women could be fired at will if you were a teacher. And so that's how career status was born. No pun intended, but yes, it was. And so that women were protected. And now we have this discussion about tenure, and I can see both sides sometimes on that issue. I really can, because nobody wants a bad teacher in front of their child. Right? I don't. But most of our teachers aren't bad. They're not as evil as the legislature has made them out to be. But that is an area where women disproportionately overwhelm the population. And so it is a real issue and something that needs to be discussed. I noticed a brochure out here about domestic violence, and we celebrated Domestic Violence Month, and I recently said on television, so we're making so much progress, right, Representative Cotham? I said, no, it's a misdemeanor. You can beat the hell out of somebody, and it's just a misdemeanor, and that's okay. I have had bills about marital rape and what is rape and different types of rape, and not once would they ever hear it or talk about it or let it even come up. And, these affect our girls, our women of all ages, and it's really just having that perspective and having that voice that is so important. And I could go on, but I won't. I do look forward to your questions. I find that type of interaction is often the best. I think it's also really important to remember, though, there are a lot of studies that are coming out saying how low turnout is and how low turnout is predicted to be this election. And so I often find myself with people who say, but we had more on Monday and people are excited and they're mad and they're going to vote. Well, unfortunately, there is no data to show that that is accurate. And that is very concerning because who has the most to lose? Women, children, the elderly, the poor. And it's really important to the Democratic Party and to women in general, but we also have to make sure that we talk to other women, especially those who are not politically minded, who aren't here today, who maybe you can talk to one-on-one and at a level and say, you know, it's really not about if you like Obama, that's not what this is about. But we really, need to talk about this. That's going to be really important for this year's election. Every election has consequences, and in 2010, people did not come out to vote. And North Carolina has gone downhill. I've seen it. I've served under both parties. This is going to affect a generation to come, at least, because these maps stay put for 10 years. And just like the Democrats were in charge for over 100 years, we better pray that that does not happen to our state.
Next for discussion, we have jobs and economic issues. North Carolina has once again given tax cuts to the wealthy, canceling tax-free weekends for families to buy school supplies. House and Senate leaders have a clear choice on tax reform between helping low-wage workers and struggling families, or giving massive windfalls to the rich and big, powerful corporations. And guess who they've chosen? To talk to us about jobs and economic issues, we have Patsy Keever. Patsy is the first vice chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party. She's also was a selected state representative for District 115. She has served 3 terms as Buncombe County Commissioner, and Patsy is also a retired teacher. She taught middle school and social studies and language arts. I present to you for jobs and economic issues, Patsy Keever.
Well, first of all, greetings to all of you. It is wonderful to be back in Hickory, and let me take this opportunity to thank those of you who worked so hard on my congressional campaign. I really do appreciate all the work that you've done. And I have to put in a plug, Tate Queen here, and I hope you're working hard for Tate. Tate, stand up and let's give you credit. And I'm very excited that the Democratic women of Catawba County have gotten organized and started this new branch, because as we all know, this is a very Republican area, and so it's important for us to, start the city and grow and grow and grow, because we need you. So we're here because is there a war on women? And Republicans may scoff at this term on war on women, but if we look at the policy changes and the budget cuts that we've made, we'll note that the majority of the people who are negatively affected by all of these things that they have done are women. Women and children, and particularly women of color. And I think that just goes without saying, we know that. So let's look at some numbers. In North Carolina, and if anybody's taking notes, this is the time. I throw out a few numbers just so you'll have something to write down and grab onto. In North Carolina, 45.6% of women are heads of their household. That's almost half of the households are headed by women, and we know that a lot of those are single women. Statistics show that women are paid only 82 cents for each dollar paid to a man. 82 cents. And women of color earn only 73 cents. This amounts to a yearly wage gap of $7,438 between men and women who work full-time. If the wage gap were eliminated, a North Carolina woman would have, on average, enough money to pay for either 63 weeks of food, 6 months of mortgage and utilities payment, 10 months of rent, or 2,213 gallons of gas. Big difference. Let's take a look at child care. Most of us in this room have had to deal with child care. Certainly Tricia Cotham does, Representative Cotham. It's a major issue for working families. In North Carolina, the average annual cost for full-time child care ranges from $4,298 for school-aged children to $8,868 for infants. A single mother with an infant earning the median income in North Carolina will spend 41.5% of her income on child care. The annual cost of tuition and fees at a public college in North Carolina is $6,220, which is nearly 42.5% less than full-time care for an infant. Okay, now those are just some, I know that's a lot of numbers, but that's just gives you an idea of what's happening to the North Carolina women in this state. And our own Senator Kay Hagan supports raising the minimum wage to $10.10 because she understands working families and particularly the issues which face women. Speaker of the House Tom Tillis, on the other hand, called raising the minimum wage a dangerous idea and suggested eliminating it entirely. When the legislature refuses to even look at a minimum wage bill, it affects not only the earning ability of workers, it affects their status as taxpayers. And if we don't have enough people working at a living wage, who is going to pay the taxes that support all of us? And whatever I say about the legislature, know that I'm not talking about Representative Cotham. She's one of the good guys, one of the good girls. The very first bill that Senator Kay Hagan sponsored in the Senate was the Lilly Ledbetter Equal Pay Act, which was passed and signed by our President Obama. Tom Tillis opposes equal pay legislation on the federal level, and as Speaker of the House has killed equal pay legislation in our own legislature. Is this a war on women? Yes, I think it is. Our three topics today, education, health, and economic issues, are closely intertwined. As a retired teacher, public education, as you've already said, that's my passion too, and it's the hardest area for me to stomach when I look at what they have done to our public education, which used to be a model for the nation. People used to look up to North Carolina. They used to revere our models, what was going on in our state. And now we are the laughing stock, and you see us on Rachel Maddow, and Lawrence O'Brien, whatever. Because education is the economic engine for the whole state, any cuts there have a wide-ranging effect on our economy. The leadership in the General Assembly has been very short-sighted, in my opinion. They've taken money from our public education system and given it to a new voucher system. That means they're taking money out of the pocket of our children, everybody's children. They're putting it in private schools, which are frequently church-related. See if you think that's okay. And they're not held to any accountable standards. That's wrong. The budget also cuts teaching assistants, which not only hinders the classroom progress of our public school children, who are our future taxpayers, but it puts thousands more on unemployment. And we know that almost all of those teaching assistants are women. Again, coincidence? I don't think so. Is there a war on women being led by the Republican Party? My answer is a resounding yes. I am admittedly biased, and I speak from the personal experience, as Tricia mentioned, of being precisely gerrymandered out of my seat in the General Assembly. In 2011, they double bunked or gerrymandered districts so badly that seven Democratic white women were dumped out of the legislature. We all know the consequences of those meandering lines, particularly here in Keever, where you have three different districts.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, they really screwed you. But I will say I'm thankful for the Voting Rights Act, which protected the seats of our sisters of color in the majority of the legislature. We still need that protection. And speaking of voting rights, we need to consider the changes in voting laws which the current legislative leadership passed. So more numbers. In 2012, 2.5 million North Carolina women voted in the presidential election compared to 2.1 million men. There are 2.8 million women registered to vote in North Carolina. No wonder the new voter ID laws, which have been proposed, disproportionately affect women. According to the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, of the 318,000 North Carolina voters who lack IDs, 63% of them are women. And 43% of the registered women voters without an ID are women of color. Remember the wage difference? If they have a low-wage job or no job, they can't afford a car and likely have no license, but they can and did vote. That scares Republicans. When the Republican-led Congress wants to turn Medicare into a voucher system, that is wrong and dangerous and would affect women more strongly because, of course, we live longer and we get lower pay. When the Speaker of the House dismissed criticism from a female representative who was fighting for jobs, and he said her criticism was born out of emotion, that is still another way of belittling women. When the legislature blocks a woman's access to health services and family planning, it also affects a woman's ability to plan her own career. When women are summarily given lip service and cookies instead of a serious seat in the decision-making process, as happened last summer in Raleigh with Governor McCrory, that is part of the war on women. There is a movement afoot to bring the Equal Rights Amendment back to Congress. I, for one, applaud that effort. I have my bracelet from 40 years ago when we were fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment. And, it's old and it's getting corroded, but it's here. And I remember being sort of patted on the head and told, "You don't need those laws. You're already protected." Well, the thought going through my mind is not a nice one, so let me say this. Do you think we need the Equal Rights Amendment now?
Yes.
I do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patsy, for bringing facts. If you care about facts and you care about people, that is a wonderful thing. I appreciate that combination. Next topic for discussion we have one of my hot button issues, healthcare and healthcare policy reform. The face of the war on women is really the attacks that have taken place on women's reproductive healthcare rights and just overall healthcare needs for women. That is one of the areas where I am passionate because I actually care about people, and looking at them, seeing them, we can see the suffering. So when there is the face of suffering amongst us, then we know that there's something that must be done. So here today to discuss healthcare policy and policy reform, we have Adam Linker. He is a policy analyst of the North Carolina Justice Center's Health Access Coalition. Adam is a designated consumer representative to the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. He also served as a healthcare and education reporter for Triangle Business Journal. Let's please welcome Adam as he comes.
Thank you very much to the ladies and to our three gentlemen. I think they're all here. I want to try to go through some of this information quickly because I want you to be armed with some facts, but there is a lot of information to go through because if there's not a war on women, there's at least a skirmish or a melee or a battle or something, one of these words, but there's certainly a sustained number of attacks on women's health care, especially coming both from Congress and the legislature. Now I work as a policy analyst at the North Carolina Justice Center, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, anti-poverty organization. So we really work primarily on issues that impact low-income families. And I sort of see the attacks on women in healthcare coming into three buckets, and I'm going to talk about two very briefly and kind of focus on one specifically. The first bucket is really things that attack women's ability to work and be out in the world instead of focusing all their time on caregiving responsibilities. And we know from polling, from anecdotal evidence, and from a lot of studies that women have disproportionate responsibility for caregiving. Oftentimes they're the caregiver of first resort, but they're almost always the caregiver of last resort for families. And one of the things you just have to keep in mind as you hear debates coming out of the legislature is that whenever you hear the term Medicaid reform coming out of the legislature, it's almost always having a disproportionate negative impact on women in North Carolina. So that first caregiving piece, for example, in the current Senate budget, they keep coming back with more and more ideas for Medicaid reform, but all of them have really dramatic impacts on what's called the medically needy program in North Carolina. And the medically needy program really is what allows a lot of people to get nursing home care in the state. And if you are taking away people's nursing home care, then, and especially for the age blind and disabled, you're basically making caregivers stay at home, quit their job, have to make arrangements that are alternate arrangements instead of having their children be able to go for short-term stays in behavioral health centers or for their elderly relatives to be able to get nursing home care. So that's one piece, is that caregiver role. Medicaid reform plans have almost universally in the Senate attacked the ability of people to get nursing home care and some of these caregiver supports. The second piece is just things that impact a lot of people but have a disproportionate impact on women. And one of the top things that come to mind is the refusal of North Carolina to expand Medicaid. As you know, that expanding Medicaid would provide health insurance to about 500,000 people in the state. It would provide a lot of protections for low-income families. And the people who are most impacted by this refusal are parents. And a lot of those parents are women. The majority of those parents impacted are women. Currently in our Medicaid program, if you're a parent, you can only get, if you're a working parent, you can only get Medicaid up to 50% of the federal poverty level. So if you make more than 50% of the federal poverty level as a parent, working parent, you cannot get Medicaid. That's something like, I forget the number, I think it's like $9,000 a year for a family of three people. So if you have a mom and 2 children, if she earns more than $9,000 a year, she makes too much for Medicaid. That would change drastically if we accepted Medicaid. Then the parents, the moms out there, would be able to take care of their own health care needs. And we know absolutely that moms taking care of their health care needs has a tremendous impact on the health of babies and small children. Because what happens currently is women often are maybe single, don't qualify for Medicaid. They become pregnant, then they are no longer eligible, or then all of a sudden they're eligible for Medicaid, but they've had all of these years of not having any health care services, so they have worse outcomes in their pregnancy. And so this is a big disproportionate impact on women. Finally are the direct impacts. There's a lot of very direct attacks on women that really target women in the legislature. Last year, one of our big initiatives was to fight the Senate budget proposal that would have ended Medicaid for thousands of pregnant women. Literally kicking thousands of pregnant women off of Medicaid. That was in the Senate budget last year that was passed out of the Senate. Every Republican senator voted for that last year. The House took it, stood strong and took it out. Republicans and Democrats opposed that in the House. That is a major one, but then another big one was this omnibus abortion restriction bill that came out of the legislature. It really has a lot of dire impacts. One of them is to create new restrictions on clinics that offer abortion services, which you have to remember when you put restrictions on those places, that they do a lot of other services as well, like cancer screenings and a lot of different treatments and counseling that are important. So the McCrory administration has not written the regulations for that yet, but it's something that we're watching very closely. If they write the regulations to be too strict, then we will see clinics closing and access to all sorts of services become more limited. I'll say, when you were mentioning Governor McCrory bringing the cookies out, I was at that vigil the night before, and when he signed that legislation, he refused to meet with the people he brought cookies to, which sort of made it worse. And then he also said that the women protesting this bill cared only about politics and not about women's health. And these are my friends who work every day for women's health. So, in fact, that's sort of what they dedicated their lives to. So that was quite an insult. But the other two pieces of that bill said, second of all, in the exchanges, when you get subsidies to buy health insurance and under the Affordable Care Act, those plans in North Carolina can't cover abortion services. So that just takes them out of all the private insurance plans when women are using their own money to buy those plans in North Carolina in the marketplace. Even if you're not getting subsidies under the Affordable Care Act, you can't buy a private insurance plan in this new marketplace that covers abortion services. It may not include that. Second of all, local governments are third, I guess. Local governments can't cover abortion services in their health plans. Those were the three restrictions in that bill. A couple other things I wanted to cover really at the federal level is the Hobby Lobby decision many people know about coming out of the Supreme Court, which said for self-insured plans, if the corporation has a religious objection, a sincere religious objection, then they don't have to cover certain types of contraception services. And these contraceptives in North Carolina have been required to be part of health plans since the 1990s. But no one objected. It was a bipartisan bill in North Carolina that said group health insurance, if you offer this health insurance, you have to cover contraceptives. That's sort of a basic provision of health care. And no one objected in the 90s. It's been the law of the land. No one said their religious liberties were violated. But then when it became part of health reform, they challenged the idea of providing contraceptives through employers. And the Supreme Court decided that for self-insured large group plans, they don't have to cover contraceptives if they have a sincere religious objection. Kay Hagan has filed a bill to overturn that decision called the Not My Boss's Business bill to try to confront that Hobby Lobby decision. And then the second piece is just the Affordable Care, the attacks on the Affordable Care Act in general. There are many benefits, of course, that are specific to women in the Affordable Care Act, but the one that comes under constant attack that Richard Burr was actually in North Carolina not long ago speaking to a legislative committee, and he mocked this provision. It's under constant attack, which is that pregnant women don't get charged more for men for health insurance. You can buy health insurance at any time even if you're pregnant and have a pre-existing condition because of your pregnancy, you can still buy health insurance. And this provision comes under constant attack, and Senator Burr said, I'm having to pay for other people's pregnancies and stuff like that. So this is something that's widely mocked. I think what these folks don't understand is how difficult, it was the number one thing I heard about, how difficult it was to get health insurance to cover pregnancy before the Affordable Care Act. In fact, there weren't health insurance plans in most states that covered pregnancy. Pregnancy was a standalone policy that you had to buy separate from your regular insurance. And oftentimes that would cost $500 to $700 a month. So you'd have to pay, maybe you're paying $500 a month for private insurance. Then you had to pay $500 a month extra to cover pregnancy and related services. And so this was a tremendous problem if you could get insurance at all. If you were already pregnant, you could not get any insurance that would cover your pregnancy. Now with the Affordable Care Act, even if you're pregnant during open enrollment, you can get health insurance to cover that birth because it's no longer a pre-existing condition. And women, just because they happen to be the people who carry the child to birth, doesn't mean that they have to pay more for insurance, which happened before the Affordable Care Act. So it's something that we have to keep vigilant on, and that's another thing that I think we have to talk a lot about and put a face on. What was the experience of people before the Affordable Care Act with trying to buy insurance when they were pregnant, or being charged more just because they were women? So I'll stop there, and I'm sure we'll have a robust discussion afterwards, but those are just some of the attacks that come to mind.
At this time, I want to invite our panelists to address each other with any questions that you may have concerning the information that's been presented by your fellow panelists today.
I don't think I have anything to contradict. I would just like to add a few things to what Adam said. I'm the vice chair of the health committee and have served on health for a long time, and so having had 2 children and being the pregnant legislator, I get these issues a lot, and a lot of groups would seek me out. And I think also when we talk about the insurance piece, we really need to talk about the access to care for pregnant women. In parts of eastern North Carolina, and if you do watch MSNBC, you've seen some of this highlighted with a hospital closing, but in that area, there are about 7 counties roughly where there's not one OBGYN. And so think about that from a female perspective, a population perspective, an economic perspective in that area. And so when you have no access to a doctor, no access to any type of maternal care, if you're poor or if you're not, that's not a good start. And that shouldn't be North Carolina in 2014, but that's where we are. There are definite healthcare disparities when it comes to women and just science in general. There are very different beliefs, I think. Patsy mentioned some of the election law information, and that really is important to talk about. And we have seen the Moral Monday movement. We have seen, we wouldn't have session on Mondays because Speaker Tillis didn't seem to like all of the attention. He likes to have people arrested and waste taxpayer dollars to prosecute them, but he didn't like to have the legislature there working.
And every vote for Kay Hagan will bring in votes for your local candidates. And things have changed so much. We know that we can't do the straight ticket voting anymore. So we have, as a job, as a party, as Democratic women and men, and we have to be sure that people know when to vote, where to vote, what the issues are, who to vote for, and we cannot forget the judges and Kay Hagan. So I'm going to take a little point of personal privilege here and teach you a little bit. We all know that we've got Kay Hagan, but statewide, no matter how badly gerrymandered, and let me stand up to do this, this is important. No matter how badly gerrymandered we have been, we can all vote for Kay Hagan, no matter where we live, no matter what party we are, we can all vote for Kay. There are also 5 Democratic judges running statewide, and so I want everybody to raise your right hand, at least spread your fingers out. All right, now what we want to remember is HEBID, H-E-B-I-D, and that stands for Hudson, Irvin, Beasley, Inman, and Davis. And now I think we have HEBID up, because I think we've got John Arrowood, who's also in the race, because somebody came out. But if you just go to the polls, if you can remember that, because I know I was so confused, and I was trying to, I know we got judges we have to vote for, so I started looking at their names, I put them in order, and a little teacher gimmick, half of us here are teachers.
Patsy,
Yes, ma'am.
would you being a teacher and I repeat it?
Yes, I will.
Repeat it.
Okay, hold on the right hand.
And everybody let them write it down.
All right, let's say HEBID. HEBID. H-E-B-I-D. That stands for Hudson, Robin Hudson. Urban, Jimmy Urban, running for appeals.
He'll be Sam Urban the fourth.
Sam Urban the fourth, right? I'm sorry, Urban. So it's Hudson, Robin Hudson, Urban, Sam Urban the fourth. Sherry Beasley, who is our only justice of color. So that's really important. We need to have that, we have the diversity that we need. So we got the women, we got the men, we got the blacks, we got the whites, we got some Asians, we got some, whatever. We want to have as much diversity as possible. So back to Hudson, Irvin, Beasley, Inman, Lucy Inman, and Mark Davis. And Mark and Lucy are over here, they're running for Court of Appeals. They are both new. This is the first time that they've had to run in a statewide race. So when you go in there, you got those 5 figures, you got he did, and then number 1 is Kay Hagan. Kay Hagan. Those 6 people, everybody can vote for. So please remember that. Thank you.
On the court, just to add to the court, is Chief Judge Martin is coming off the court now. And so, and that made Judge Linda McGee the Chief Justice now, or Chief of the Court of Appeals, and that's who Air was running for that, for Chief Judge Martin.
Yeah, right.
And just to add real quickly to Sharon Beasley's seat, there's an African-American woman who has decided to run against Justice Beasley at the last minute. She was predicted to run against Mark Davis. She's extremely conservative. Luke Harris, is that it? I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank over the names.
I remember neither.
I know, but you're going to hear more, and you're going to see confusion, and it's happening on purpose, and we really need to make sure that we protect Justice Beasley. She's a wonderful justice.
So Beasley's our little finger. We need to remember that. That other lady. There's a lady up here ready.
My name is Olame Greer, and I am a single parent, and I don't have a small child, but I have a daughter that's in college. And speaking of education, if they are doing, taking money away from our public schools, are they not also hurting our children from going to college? You know, being a single parent and a woman and money is really short. So what can we do, or what's happening with our college?
It's a great question. I think it's something that really needs to be discussed more. We often hear, well, they're against schools or they're for vouchers. We kind of need to take it a little bit more and say, well, why? What is this mentality that we're dealing with? Because if we're just going to be obstacles and say, no, we're not going to advance anything in education, there are fundamental differences when it comes to what are public schools, what's the role of schooling and education, what curriculum is appropriate for our students. And all of these issues often go back to a religious base, very different perspectives, but not necessarily, but they are the predominance of the legislature. So you see vouchers coming, they would like to expand that more than we would be able to tolerate. Per child, to go anywhere that they wanted to go in North Carolina, with very limited accountability and really no place to really see what is happening with these vouchers. You and I know that children of poverty, and this is what really gets me when the Republicans talk about, well, you know, they may have to pay $2,000 to go to a private school, but they're going to get a voucher for 8, let's just say. I mean, anybody has $2,000. They really want to make it. And I said in this committee, I have people in my district who can't ride the bus because they can't afford it. And so if you're really concerned about those people, $2,000 is not going to happen. And as a legislator, I represent a part of Mecklenburg County, but as an educator, as the vice chair of the committee, I represent the entire state. And I have visited many schools in North Carolina. It's very obvious to see the haves and have-nots. There's definitely a rural versus urban divide. There's definitely a black versus white and other. We don't ever like to talk about who that other might be at all. These are real issues, and we can't just have schools that are great for some. Every child deserves and must have an excellent teacher assistant, a dynamic school leader and school principal with the funding and the resources that he or she needs. That's not where we are in North Carolina. We have to get there, And I do believe we can get there, but it's gonna take a lot of education and teaching of some legislators. And thank you for the question. I know it's hard, and I wish I could say it's all gonna be fixed, but I do want to get that information out there.
Do either of our other panelists have a brief remark?
I would just like to add to Ms. Brainerd, was that old name?
Greener,
They've also taken away the, you used to be able to put money into a college fund, and that's no longer tax deductible.
right.
That's just one more show of how arrogant they are and how insensitive and out of touch. And the only way we change all of this is by voting.
But if you want to get a beach home or an airplane, we'll make sure to help you. That's what's happening. And the other piece to this I really have to add is about early childhood education. These are two fundamental issues that we have. And this does come down to Republican versus Democrat. I'm sure many of you believe and you know the importance of early childhood education and children having the opportunity to read, to learn, to grow, to get those social, physical, emotional, everything that they need at such a young age. There seems to be a mentality with Republicans that's just babysitting. It's not important, it's irrelevant. I'm not paying for daycare, I'm not paying for babysitters. And so we have to remember, again, most of my colleagues, they never had a child in daycare or really in any type of preschool. That's my generation. I was one of those first kids who went to daycare in the late 70s. I was one of those. So there are really different walks of life that are brought here. We're seeing cuts to early childhood education. And when we talk about this, the state funds Smart Start. We have several different programs. That is a tremendous loss, and that affects North Carolina for generations and really affects different areas of the state, and that's very problematic.
And we appreciate your input, and we thank our panelists so very much for your knowledgeable skills.
And the only way we change all of this is by voting.